This is not a story about family. And this is not a story about moral values. This is a story about numbers. In 2023, the fertility rate in the European Union fell to 1.38 children per woman, the lowest level in modern history. Meanwhile, the replacement rate needed to sustain a population is 2.1. Below that threshold, a society does not grow. It shrinks. 60 years ago, Europe welcomed nearly 7 million newborns every year. Today, that number has dropped to just 3.67 million. Almost half of it has disappeared. This is not a surprise. The data has been sending warnings for decades. There was a small rise in the early 2000s. Then the decline returned, and this time, deeper. Mothers are getting older. First children are arriving later. And nearly half of all families stop at just one child. What we are witnessing is not a temporary crisis, but demographic gravity. Slow, steady, and extremely hard to reverse. Some call it a cultural crisis. Others blame immigration. Some hope subsidies and baby bonuses will fix everything. But mathematics does not care about ideology. The question is no longer why Europeans stopped growing. The real question is, what happens to a civilization when it runs out of children? Without immigration, Europe runs out of people. That is not an opinion. It is arithmetic. In 2023, the fertility rate in the European Union fell to 1.38 children per woman, far below the replacement level of 2.1. The implication is simple. Each new generation is smaller than the one before it. 6 decades ago, Europe welcomed nearly 6.8 million babies every year. Today, that number has dropped to just 3.67 million. This is not a temporary lifestyle shift. It is structural decline. Some argue that immigration threatens European civilization. But the data tells the opposite story. Without immigration, there would not be enough children, workers, or taxpayers to support a rapidly aging society. Nearly 23% of all children born in the European Union in 2023 had mothers born outside the EU. In countries like Luxembourg, the figure reaches 2/3. This is not replacement. It is a last line of support. Even countries often praised as pronatalist models, like France or the Nordic states, remain far below replacement level. The problem is not who is arriving. The problem is who is not being born. Demographic mathematics does not recognize nostalgia, identity, or political fear. If birth rates remain below 2.1, then without a steady flow of people from outside, the final outcome is already predictable. Not an invasion. Not a conspiracy. Just numbers quietly doing their work. Finland has been named the happiest country in the world again and again. It offers high-quality public education, universal healthcare, generous parental leave, child subsidies, and a work-life balance often held up as a global model. Yet the birth charts tell a very different story. Since 2010, Finland's birth rate has fallen by nearly a third. By 2023, the country recorded one of the lowest fertility rates in the Nordic region, far below the replacement level of 2.1. This is not an isolated case. In France, a country with some of the most aggressive family policies in Europe, fertility once approached 2.0. Now, it is steadily declining. Other Nordic nations show the same pattern. Slowdown, stagnation, and then decline. The message is clear. Even the best social systems in the world are unable to reverse falling birth rates. Researchers across Europe point to consistent causes. People are having children later in life. The rising cost of housing and living. Long-term economic uncertainty. And the growing opportunity cost of raising children in advanced societies. In Finland itself, the government acknowledges that many young adults are postponing or abandoning plans to start families because of difficulties forming long-term relationships, a strong focus on education and careers, and persistent financial insecurity. The problem is not a lack of subsidies. The problem is that modern life increasingly works against human reproduction. When a country with high levels of happiness, strong social protection, and comprehensive family policies still cannot sustain its birth rate, then this is no longer just a national policy issue. It is a crisis of modern civilization. Depopulation does not begin in capital cities. It begins in empty classrooms. On some Greek islands, an entire elementary school now has only 2 students. On the island of Lemnos, classes are being shut down not because of budget cuts, but because there are simply no children left. In 2025, the Greek government announced that more than 700 schools would close, most of them in remote villages and small islands. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. When national fertility rates fall far below replacement level, the impact is felt first on the periphery. Villages lose their children. Then they lose their teachers. Then their healthcare services. And eventually, they lose the very reason to remain inhabited. The same pattern appears across rural Italy and Eastern Europe. Populations age rapidly. Young people move to the cities, and birth rates never recover to where they need to be. Schools are the earliest warning sign. When schools close, shops soon follow. Public services are withdrawn. Property values collapse. And the remaining families are forced to leave in search of a future elsewhere. In these regions, immigration offers almost no solution. Without jobs, healthcare, and education, there is little incentive for newcomers to settle. Depopulation becomes a closed loop. The map of Europe today is not collapsing from the outside. It is hollowing out from within. And every school that shuts its doors is proof that the process has already passed the point of return. Across Europe, the answer always sounds the same. Child subsidies, parental leave, birth bonuses. France built one of the most expensive pronatalist systems in the world. Nordic countries offer months of paid parental leave, universal child benefits, and state-subsidized childcare. Yet the graph refuses to move. After a small rise in the early 2000s, the European Union's fertility rate fell again, reaching 1.38 children per woman in 2023, the lowest level in its history. The data reveals a consistent pattern. Pronatalist policies slow the decline, but they do not reverse it. In France, fertility once approached replacement level. Now it is sliding backward again. In the Nordic countries, the same trend appears, despite extremely high social spending per family. The problem is not the intention of governments. The problem is the opportunity cost of modern life. In highly educated societies, having children often means losing time, mobility, and career stability. Within an economic system that demands constant flexibility and productivity, subsidies may cover part of the direct financial cost, but they cannot replace long-term security. As a result, policies that are politically popular become expensive yet deliver minimal results. Pronatalism creates an illusion of control, as if birth rates can be raised simply by adding more funding. But cross-country data shows otherwise. This trend is structural and spans political systems. It is not the failure of one policy, not the mistake of one country. It is the limit of what any state can do within the framework of modern civilization. In 2023, the European Union's fertility rate stood at 1.38 children per woman. That figure places Europe among the fastest aging regions on Earth. At the same time, many African nations still record fertility rates above 3 children per woman. even though those numbers are beginning to decline as well. The difference is not just statistical. It is a difference in historical direction. Europe is entering a phase in which its working-age population is shrinking, while the number of elderly citizens rises rapidly. Africa, by contrast, still has a massive wave of young people who will enter the global labor market in the decades ahead. Throughout modern history, economic, military, and political power has always rested on one simple foundation: the number and age of people. The workforce determines industrial capacity. Age structure determines fiscal burden. And demographics determine how much risk a nation can afford to take. As Europe struggles to sustain pensions and welfare systems, many African countries will face the opposite challenge: creating enough jobs for their growing youth populations. This is not about who is better. It is about where the future is concentrated. Again and again in history, the center of global gravity has shifted with demographics. From Europe to America, from America to Asia, and now, slowly, toward the South. If these trends continue, the global powers of the 21st century will not be determined only by technology or capital, but by who still has children. Because in the end, the future of global power is decided in the cradle of the next generation. This chart does not scream. It simply falls, slowly, year after year. There is no single policy that failed. No single group to blame. There is only direction. Europe is not being replaced. Europe is shrinking. In some places, schools have already closed. In others, entire villages are disappearing from the map. And in the centers of power, birth rates keep declining, without waiting for debates to end. Immigration is not an ideological answer. It is a mathematical necessity. But even that only delays the process. It does not reverse it. The biggest question is not how to raise birth rates tomorrow morning. The real question is how a civilization learns to live when it knows its future will be smaller than its past. Because in the end, history is not shaped by slogans or nostalgia, but by one simple thing: how many children are born today? And that chart has already given its answer.